the Steam Deck. This device is absolutely amazing in almost all aspects bar a few, which we will talk about later. The possibilities that this device, console, or PC, whatever you want to call it, are so insane that it became an instant hit when it first arrived in 2022. Today I'm going to discuss various aspects of this magnificent, beautiful piece of technology that make it worth purchasing for everyone that has ever done anything ever. We're going to go over some mods that can be done on both the hardware and the software to make your experience better, as well as some other cool things that make this absolute beast as cool and mythical as it is. Before we jump into this, however, I just want to quickly preface that this video has some parts that are scripted and some parts that aren't. I'm 99% sure you'll be able to tell which sections are scripted and which ones aren't. After all, I'm a fucking idiot. Anyway, let's get right into this. Oh yeah, actually, quickly, before we start, yeah, I am wearing gloves. I'm a fat man with anxiety, so my hands are disgusting, and my fingernails are even worse, so yeah, I'm doing you a favour here. Please appreciate it. The Steam Deck was first revealed in mid-2021 to incredibly positive results. I personally think that something as magical as this was revealed at the perfect time to drive up that hype, mainly because the Nintendo Switch had been out for 4 years at this point, and while the system was, and still is, very good at what it does, that whole form factor felt a little bit stale, and with no new competition from anyone in any capacity, things definitely got a bit boring after a while. Until now. This brand new device right here, it looked insanely promising from the get-go. The Switch, while a very good device, receives fair criticism for a few reasons. Probably the main way people sometimes shit on it is because of the way it completely butchers the games released for it. If you're unsure as to what I mean, however, then please take a quick look at some of these fine examples that I shamelessly stole from Google Images. I can hardly tell the difference. Now granted, some of these comparison images show captures from the PC versions of games which, as everybody knows, are vastly superior to their console counterparts in both visual fidelity and performance. I may be biased as someone who primarily plays on PC, but it is just a fact and I will not be told otherwise. You console peasants can fuck off. I'm just kidding, but please stay. I want you to watch this video, man, please. But even though these PC images were probably captured on something like the powerhouse of a GPU, the Tesco Value R7 260, with it being paired with the equally powerful Intel Pentium 4 CPU, the graphics for the ports on some of the Switch games are just abhorrent anyway, and puts you in physical agony when you look upon them for more than 3 nanoseconds. Before I really get into the Steam Deck, I'd like to briefly talk about the Switch and how it held the top spot for portable gaming for such a long time. This console does some things incredibly well, and I think one of the main reasons is the hardware itself. To put into a single word, it's unique. The Switch came along in 2017, when proper portable gaming had all but died, and that whole market was mainly dominated by mobile gaming and the marvel that was PUBG Mobile. This was a completely fresh take on portable gaming that promised current-gen console quality for on-the-go gaming. It's just a shame that current-gen at the time that this released was the Atari 2600. This was, and still is, a huge deal. The console and its hardware paved the way for the Steam Deck, and even though I believe that the Switch is inferior overall, I love the way the console feels to use, and I've enjoyed many games on it and still do to this day, despite me owning one of these. The second main reason I think the console has done so well, and why it is still doing so incredibly well, are the games themselves. I know I just said that the games that were released on the hardware were absolutely terrible, but I definitely don't mean that all games fit that stereotype. I'm mainly referring to the PS4 or Xbox One games that were ported over to the inferior hardware. The first-party exclusives, such as Animal Crossing New Horizons, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and Mario Kart Odyssey, and Mario Odyssey, to name a few. Nintendo's unwillingness to have their games on anything but their own proprietary hardware may have actually worked in their favour, as it meant that they didn't have to compromise on any elements on how the game worked and functioned. Nintendo are very notable when it comes to stunning and unique art styles that can make the simplest of games incredibly visually pleasing. I think Breath of the Wild especially is a perfect example of this, as the game itself does not focus on the minute graphical details that you'd need a microscope to see, but instead uses the console's shortcomings to its advantage. It uses the unique art style to its advantage, which means that despite the console's lack of power, the game still looks amazing and is perfectly serviceable to those who play it. That is one downside to PC gaming in my opinion. With amazing hardware such as the RTX 4090 being available to the public, people focus on the horsepower that those components have, and instantly shoot for the ultra-realistic Skyrim mods that add insane detail to one of the random character's breasts. When done correctly, however, these graphics can work fine, but when things like powerful hardware and Unreal Engine 5 are commercially available, that whole market can get oversaturated very quickly. You know, there's not really much incentive to have proper, unique art styles anymore. Regardless, I'm already on a massive tangent. No need to overcomplicate the complication that is this video. I may actually cover this in another video though. This whole topic is very interesting to me. Let me know if you'd like to see that. The last and probably biggest reason is accessibility. Nintendo have always been pretty good when it comes to advertising their devices as friendly and easy to learn for anyone who decides to give them a shot. Think about how many people had a Nintendo Wii. There were about 4 Wii consoles for every single person in the world, and my grandparents, who are the most tech-illiterate people on the planet, even decided to join in whenever we'd break out the Wii Sports Bowling on a crisp Saturday afternoon. There's a reason why, at the time of recording, the Switch is the 3rd best-selling console of all time, selling over 140 million units worldwide, which is just crazy numbers. This console is so easy for someone to learn, also with it being handy to just bring out and about, connect with your friends who also have them, and that the form factor presented within the Switch is new and exciting, with the removable controllers and such. You know, it was no wonder why this became a sensation as quick as it did. After all, Nintendo always hit with their consoles 100% of the time, 50% of the time. Now that we've kissed Nintendo's ass long enough, it's time for us to finally get back to the main point of this video. The Steam Deck! As previously mentioned, in 2021, 4 years after the Nintendo Switch was first released to the public, PC gaming supergiant Valve announced a brand new device that would shake the fabric of space-time itself. Something that was completely out of the blue, but also a welcome surprise. The Steam Deck. Something that was rightfully so, instantly compared to the Nintendo Switch. It was a handheld device that boasted an insanely powerful AMD RDNA 2 APU chip that was built to run on Valve's new SteamOS to bring you your PC games library for on-the-go gaming. The entry-level model of the Steam Deck started out at 64GB of eMMC storage, which instantly beat out the regular Switch's 32GB of eMMC storage, but was actually on par with the soon-to-release Switch OLED, which also had 64GB of eMMC storage. The next model up was a great improvement when it came to storage. This time, you had a whopping 256GB SSD. That's right, a physical solid-state drive in a handheld. The best model, which is what I have here, came with a 512GB SSD, which just blew everybody's mind, and rightfully so. All of that including the microSD card storage expansion, which I believe limits out at about 2TB of extra storage, which is pretty crazy in all honesty. As a stock configuration, you could have 2.5TB of game storage in a handheld. That's just crazy. I could be wrong about that SD card limit though, so please let me know if you know and I am wrong. Granted that with the way technology is rapidly progressing, especially lately, advanced hardware on a device that was 4 years newer wasn't exactly a shock. I think what was more of a shock was the fact that it had been so long since something like this had come along, and therefore competitors and the like hadn't been making the incremental upgrades that you would come to expect in mobile phones or even the newfound Steam Deck competition. I do tell a lie actually, we will reference these later, but the Aya Neo has been making them since before the Steam Deck was announced, and also GPD, they make handheld PCs as well, so we will touch upon that. I think another reason as to why people got so hyped is simply because of who was developing this. Valve. Valve are absolute giants when it comes to the PC gaming market. Definitely due to the fact that they own the biggest platform on PC, which everybody knows as Steam. The fact that they have shown themselves to focus more on how the developers on their platform are treated instead of purely monetary reasons has made them a big pillar of the industry as a whole. Not to mention, they have also created some amazing products, from their games to their hardware. Some examples include the Half-Life franchise, Counter-Strike, and the Valve Index VR headset. They have got some absolutely monumental achievements in their time as the top dog, and capitalising on the humongous gap in the market that portable gaming had was such a good move from them, it was unreal. It's almost as if Gabe Newell himself has some insane premonitions that tell him to develop something that'll just be a money printer for the next decade, and he just does it without a second thought. Not only this though, the fact that they made it so you could directly connect your Steam account that already exists to this and have all of your games that you purchased over the years available to you whenever, wherever, was just an insane concept. Gone are the days of buying the same game multiple times on loads of different platforms. Valve was here to the rescue. And while this device initially catered towards their already existing audience due to this fact, it also took the Switch route of being incredibly accessible to acquire and then use for people that had never gotten into the PC gaming market before. SteamOS was advertised as being completely user-friendly, so even your tech-illiterate grandparents who have no eyes and no limbs could use one of these easily. It's so intuitive and easy to pick up and play, all while being incredibly nice to look at. You know what? Now that we've gotten onto the subject, let's take a look at the software and what you can do with it. For those of you that know, SteamOS is based off of Linux, which is incredibly useful and important for some of the stuff you can do with this device. Let me briefly broaden what I'm talking about here. Linux is an alternative operating system that people use to things like Windows, macOS, and even Android. It can be a little more complicated to learn, but can usually be used to implement certain features that may be missing from the operating system that you would usually use. This can make your experience a little more personalised and suited to your tastes, and as I say, this can also be done on Android, so you can flash this on a lot of mobile devices. So what I'm basically trying to say is that this is actually a very, very versatile base to work with if you have the know-how. Am I suggesting that you go out and install this on all of your devices, however? Simple answer, no. While it can be very rewarding to find alternatives that work for you, due to the fact that it's not a very popular alternative, there can be a lot of compatibility issues with certain things, and because of this, it can be incredibly difficult to find fixes or ways around said issues with 100% success rates. Now, I'm sure that someone who is clearly infinitely more intelligent than myself and gets loads more women who go to different schools will tell you,
well, it's actually way better than Windows, because I can do what I want with it.
And yes, while that is true, its bare bones design can put a lot of tech-illiterate people off, because the user experience can be very unintuitive unless you have the know-how and patience for it, which a lot of people like myself do not. SteamOS, however, tries to take that difficulty that can be associated with Linux and tries to make it as user-friendly as possible to absolutely fantastic results. SteamOS is actually so good that they overhauled Steam Big Picture mode on PC to look and function exactly like this. As I said previously, it's such a clean and easy to use bit of software that makes your overall experience a lot more enjoyable. It functions exactly like the software on your PlayStation or Xbox would, except with a lot more features, which we will touch upon shortly. Before we do, however, I would like to quickly touch upon the optimization of SteamOS for the hardware inside of the Steam Deck. Valve tuned SteamOS so it would run almost flawlessly with the RDNA 2 chip inside the Steam Deck, and that can be seen on multiple games. While the Steam Deck is powerful for what it is, at the end of the day it's not quite the powerhouse that you'd expect. It does a lot more than you'd imagine it to, sure, but it's not going to beat out your crusty GTX 1060 and Ryzen 5 1400 that are both hanging on for their dear lives. However, the black magic that Valve did in order to get some games to run on this is absolutely insane. You can adjust the settings on games like Cyberpunk 2077, one of the most intensive games of all time, even on high-end hardware of this year. You can get that game to run at a solid 30 FPS on the Steam Deck. A cool little detail that you may have missed, however, is that on some games, like for instance Cyberpunk or the Callisto Protocol, you can actually find a Steam Deck settings preset within the graphics options to maximize that sort of performance to visual fidelity ratio. Personally, I don't play a lot of games like this, however, because it sort of optimizes it for 30 FPS, and I'm one of those degenerate bastards that doesn't really enjoy anything that is 30 FPS. I can sometimes push myself through it on games that I've only exclusively played at 30 FPS and haven't played above, but on games that I have played at least 60, I cannot go back down to 30. We will briefly touch upon this later, however. I just want to kiss Valve's ass a little bit more. Elden Ring, another fairly intensive game that came out in 2022, also runs incredibly well on the Steam Deck, and I have heard people say that it sticks at a nice 40 FPS, which is pretty great for a modern AAA game on a handheld. Because these games are all the PC versions, you can get a way better experience as you can actually tweak the graphics settings to your liking. Some of you may prefer the better FPS and don't mind the slightly worse fidelity, and some of you may prefer the opposite. Having the option to do this on a handheld device is absolutely mind-blowing, and just allows that deeper sense of personal customization that Valve has pretty much nailed with this. Not only can you change the in-game settings, however, but SteamOS has a whole host of performance settings baked directly into the OS itself, which can be altered on the fly. You can change performance statistics that get shown while you play, so you can accurately tell what the system components are doing at any given time to help you better understand how to further optimize and take advantage of the hardware. There are 5 levels with this, with level 1 showing a simple FPS counter in the top left of the screen, and level 5 showing you truly in-depth statistics at what every single system component is doing. A lot of you who are PC gamers may recognise this as the Reaver Tuner statistics sort of overlay. You know, it's a very useful tool that a lot of people use to test benchmarking, what certain components are doing, and obviously how to try and get some extra performance out of your hardware. And on here, it is no different. I do want to add though that may look daunting for someone that isn't exactly experienced with this whole thing, and that's fair enough. It's still daunting for me, and I'm quite well versed in hardware, but just know that this is not actually mandatory for playing any games on the Steam Deck. It is more just there as a cool little addition. You can also change things like the refresh rate of the Steam Deck while you play. So if you have a game that runs at a steady 30 to 40 frames, then you can limit the refresh rate of the Steam Deck itself in order to use less power but get the same performance. Maximising the battery life will be very important, especially if you use your deck out and about, but again, this is something we will briefly touch upon later. You can also change the TDP limit, as well as manually adjust the GPU clock speeds to exactly what you want them to be. These both have different benefits for different games and programs, but it's worth exploring what level of performance you want from a specific game, then working on those tweaks from there. One of the best things you can also do from here is add FSR. For those of you that don't know what FSR is, then let me briefly explain. FSR, or Fidelity FX Super Resolution, is AMD's version of NVIDIA DLSS, or Deep Learning Super Sampling. What these do is allow you to run games at a lower resolution, while the game utilises AI to upscale the image to whatever resolution you have the game set to. While this never looks as good as native resolution, you can get the performance of the game running in, say, 720p, but with the game being upscaled to 1080p. It basically allows for a lot more performance at a much lower cost of visual fidelity than you would have if you just flat out lowered the resolution. Having this baked into SteamOS itself really makes people like me, who want as many frames as possible, very happy, as it means that I can squeeze a little bit extra out of games at little cost to my experience. This works extremely well on the deck, as with the 7-inch 800p screen as seen on the LCD model I have here, FSR is a lot less noticeable than on my 30-odd inch 1440p ultra-wide monitor. As I say though, none of these are absolutely imperative to your experience on games, and are just used if you want to really optimise everything you are doing. Oh, before we move on, let me just show you this. You can have little per game profiles, so you can personalise any of these tweaks for any game you have. So if you go on a different game, you can change them for your, preference, and then if you come back on, say, Left 4 Dead, it'll load the settings that you chose before. Pretty neat, right? All of this isn't to say, however, that it wouldn't be beneficial to do some basic tweaks to get some free performance or extra battery life at no cost to your FPS. The fact that you can tweak games and other programs as easily and thoroughly as you want on such a little device is absolutely insane and one of the major selling points of this little guy. Now, when the Steam Deck was first revealed, because of Valve being the company that were developing the product, as well as its similarities to the Nintendo Switch, a lot of people were initially confused as to whether this was going to be a handheld console or something else. Valve quickly cleared this up, however, by stating that this device was actually going to be a handheld PC. Other than the fact that you can properly adjust graphics settings in the game, which is exclusive to the PC ports, you can do this cool thing with your Steam Deck, which opens up a lot, and I mean a lot, more possibilities to you. All you're going to want to do, if you want to get to this sort of thing, is press the Steam button down and go into the power options, or just hold the power button to bring up this menu. From here, you'll notice an option that just says switch to desktop. Click that, and you're pretty much done. I mean, come on. Isn't this just the coolest fucking thing you can do on a handheld? Access actual PC features? I swear to God, man, Valve, they just know how to cook with a device like this, I swear. If you want to return to the comfort of normal SteamOS, however, just click the Return to Gaming Mode button. I have it in my top left, it might be anywhere else for you, but it will look like that and it will just say Return to Gaming Mode. From here, the console will restart and you'll boot back into the normal OS. Before we do that though, we can do a lot of things from desktop mode to make your experience better. Hell, if you really wanted to, you could just use this in desktop mode fully. The way you can use this device is absolutely insane and varied, but we will touch upon that more when we begin to talk about the hardware a little bit. Because this device has a mode that allows you to basically use this as a fully handheld PC, that means certain worlds are opened up to you that aren't allowed on other devices like your home consoles or a Switch. The Steam Deck is one of the greatest devices for many reasons, but one of them is a reason that is fairly close to me, and that is emulation. Emulation for the uninitiated allows you to take games that you own or buy sailing the 7 seas and play them on the hardware that the emulator was built for. This allows you to play anything from the Atari 2600 all the way up to the PS3 and Xbox 360, and get this, even the fucking Nintendo Switch themselves, with potential of PS4 being fairly close. I'm talking less than a month. Some of you might not care too much about this though, and that's fair enough, but for someone like myself who only got into PC gaming recently and instead grew up with home consoles with a lot of exclusives, the possibility of emulation makes having a PC or a Steam Deck so much cooler, it is unreal. This means that not only do you get the entire PC library you have at your disposal, but the libraries of consoles all the way from 50 years ago to 10 years ago. Obviously, some games on more modern consoles exist on PC, and so playing the console versions may actually be an inferior way to play. But the fact that you can get console exclusives like some of the ones I'm going to show later is absolutely insane. There's a lot of reasons why this is amazing for the deck. Obviously, the major one being that you can take the games that you had to play on a shitty little CRT TV out and about with you in this nice, sleek device. Quickly going back to Linux, however, because it can be a very bare-bones system, compatibility with some games that would work fine on Windows is sometimes very spotty and could produce unplayable experiences on some of your favourite titles. There are usually ways and fixes around this, but it sometimes requires tinkering with things people may not want to do out of the fear that they break something else, which is perfectly fair enough. With emulation though, if it has a console port, then you could simply just download that version. Or if the game is supported but a buggy port, then you could simply download the version that works for you on an emulator. A personal example of this for me would be Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3. With the release of the Master Collection last year, I was so excited at the prospect of playing some of my favourite games on the go without the use of a PS Vita that locked the game to a crisp 30 FPS. As much as I love this little device, playing the games on this with this screen and the lack of ergonomics did sort of make for a bit of a challenging time, so I was very excited for this. Unfortunately, however, both MGS2 and 3 were incompatible with SteamOS for the longest time without some weird workarounds. I, however, being the lazy bastard that I am, couldn't be asked to figure it out, so I just installed them onto the PS3 emulator RPCS3, and that allowed me to play those games portably without trouble at a nice crisp 60 FPS. I know I've said this a few times now, but having the ability to do this is just fucking incredible. It's so good what this device can do. Also, I know I probably shouldn't admit this as Nintendo will smite me down, but I even got Mario Kart 8 working on this once, and Astral Chain, which ran twice as good on here as it did natively on the Switch. There was also a kind of funny thing that happened with Switch emulation on the deck, well, just Switch emulation in general, and it happened just before the release of Tears of the Kingdom last year. The NSP file for Tears of the Kingdom leaked about a week to 2 weeks before the game was actually officially released, and so people had already completed it on this device and before it even came out on the Switch. Just goes to show how powerful this little beast is. Switch emulation though has definitely become a lot harder since Nintendo took a nuke to Yuzu and Ryujinx, the primary Switch emulators, and so I don't know if doing this is still possible without the files on hand. It might be, but I'm not sure. I've been talking about emulators for so long, but I forgot to even mention how easy it is to get them onto the Steam Deck. It's honestly one of the easiest setups I've ever had to perform, and because of that, it's actually quite surprising how powerful it is. Instead of installing each individual emulator one at a time, there is a beautiful little program called EmuDeck, which can be installed for free by doing this. So, what you're going to want to do is open up your favourite browser or whatever browser you use. You can install one of these from the Discover page down here on your Steam Deck, so you can't install them normally because the deck doesn't actually have a web browser by default as far as I'm aware, so you can just do it from here. That's how I install Firefox on this device. When you're on here, just type in EmuDeck and then click the top link and it should take you to this website. Scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page until you see this here, and then just click Download EmuDeck, download for free, and it should just download to your downloads folder. I've said download way too fucking much in the past minute, Jesus Christ. Once here, just take this from the downloads folder, put it onto your desktop, and then double click away. Just click continue, and it should just install EmuDeck. I already have this installed, so I don't actually know if this is going to fuck everything up. If it does, please be grateful, because I've done this for your convenience. Once it's finished downloading, you should notice that this actually opens on your device. Now, it's going to be slightly different for me because I've already installed EmuDeck on my device previously, but all you'll have to do is choose what emulators you want to install, so there are tons there, all the way from, like I say, SNES to PS3. So I've got a few installed. I'm not going to show you how to do that, but I will actually briefly show you how to get your games into Steam. If you haven't already as well, go into your Start menu, go to All Applications, or just search for it, and then find EmuDeck in your menu. From there, all you can do is just right-click it, click Add to Desktop, and it should just be there on your desktop for your convenience. Once you've double clicked on this, obviously like I say, you should have all of the emulators you've chosen at this point already downloaded, so you should actually see this menu. From here, just go to Steam ROM Manager. This is actually after you've installed all the games you want into your root ROM folder, by the way, so I'm not going to show you how to do that here because it's kind of lengthy and I don't want this already long video to go out much more than it has. But once you've clicked on Steam ROM Manager, it's going to have to require Steam to be closed for this, but if you've got a mouse and keyboard shut, then it shouldn't be a problem. If you are using the actual thumbstick or touchpad in themselves, you might have to reopen it afterwards to get some compatibility back, but for the moment, let's not worry about that. Just click Add Games, click Pass, and then you should see all of the games that are in here that you've put into your ROMs folder. It will read them, and then from here, just click Save to Steam, and they will appear in your Steam gaming mode. Just scroll over to the right in your library to non-Steam, and they should all be there in a nice list for you. And that's pretty much it. What I would actually recommend doing is taking a look at the games you're going to download and see if there's any settings inside the emulators themselves, which you can also find in your Start Menu Applications folder, to see if there are any settings that might actually help them work better. For RPCS3 especially, you might need to do this for some games. I've had to do this with the Ratchet & Clank trilogy, as well as a couple of other games that I used to have on here. A little bit for PCSX2, the PS2 emulator. So yeah, it's worthwhile having a look at compatibility and what you can do to give yourself a bit more of a stable experience or some more frames or something. You know, there's going to be something out there that will tell you what you need to know. Every game is different after all, and emulators definitely still aren't perfect, so there are going to be some things that don't work, so don't be disheartened. Just have a look around and see if there's something you can try to fix it. Now, before we go back to gaming mode and I show you all of the emulator games that I've installed, we're going to install one more thing, and let me give you a brief introduction to what that thing is. The thing that we're going to download now is called DeyLoader. Now, for those of you that don't know what DeyLoader is, basically what it does is it allows you to have a load of plugins for the Steam Deck directly into gaming mode, and so you can change loads of things due to analytics that are shown, to certain color palettes, to a lot of customization and personalization features that we will go over once we've installed it. If you want to know how to install it, just go back on your favourite or preferred browser, type in DeyLoader, press enter, and then the second link down or wherever decky.xyz is, just click on that and you should be greeted with this website. From here, just go on download, and it should just download to your downloads folder. Now, do what we did before and transport that from your downloads folder onto your desktop. Just double click and it should run. From here, it might ask you to input your sudo or admin password. Now this is a very simple thing you can change, so if you go into your start menu and click Steam Deck User, it will open the settings page and then just click change password and set it to whatever you want. That will then be your admin password. So just enter your password, hit enter. It's going to be slightly different for me as I already have DeyLoader installed, but it's going to be a fairly straightforward process. If you are stuck, however, there are plenty of tutorials out on the internet that tell you how to do this. So I'm just going to update to latest release for the stable version, considering I run the stable firmware. From what I do remember, however, you will actually have to choose what version of DeyLoader to install depending on what you do use. So if you use the beta branch for SteamOS or the pre-release version of SteamOS, then you will have to choose the DeyLoader version corresponding to what version you use. It's fairly simple to understand, but just remember to keep that information in mind when you come to install this. If you haven't changed anything, however, chances are you are probably on the stable build anyway, so just give that a run and find out if it works. And that's it. The window is closed, and that is something we won't see until we get back into gaming mode. So let's do that. Let's go right back into gaming mode and show you some of the differences. So, now that we're back in gaming mode, you'll probably be able to see some of the changes we've made right off the bat. If you press the quick access menu, so this button in the bottom right, you will see at the bottom there is this new little icon in the shape of a plug. This is your DeyLoader plugin. That's right. It's just right here on the quick access menu, so all you have to do is press one button and you can access all of these cool features easily. It's all very handy and intuitive, so it shouldn't be too hard to get used to. From here, you can install specific things you want, like different plugins, and some of the plugins we're going to go over will be ones that are customization based or will help you in your general compatibility day-to-day life. We're quickly going to go over the customization aspects though, so you're going to want to download these three for this: Animation Changer, Audio Loader, and at the bottom CSS Loader. These will be the main three you use to change customization aspects of this device. In Animation Loader, what we see is things called boot, suspend, and throttle animations. Now, these all correspond to different animations that you will see when utilizing the Steam Deck. So, the boot animation plays when you boot up the device from shutdown. The suspend animation plays when you, press the power button to go into sleep mode, and the throbber, I'm pretty sure, is when it wakes up, so something like that. I don't use those two, but the boot animation is actually what I use. So I use this one here called Accurate Boot Sequence, which basically displays all of the specs in some sort of old operating system type format. It's really cool for someone technically minded like myself who likes numbers and data, so I think this works perfectly for me. You know what, actually, let's just show you. Just like that. Neat, right? You can customize it to your own sort of liking. It's fucking brilliant. There are loads of animations like this, however. As you can see, we're browsing the animations right now. Now I can just hold the down on the D-pad and we can get loads. Loads with different themes, loads with different sort of, ideas. So find one that fits you. I can guarantee there'll be one that you like, at the very least. The next one we're going to talk about is one called Audio Loader. Now, if you've been just listening in the past minute or so, you'll notice that the Steam Deck has quite a lot of UI noises that you can hear now. You know, they're alright, they're serviceable, but some people might want to change them, some people like myself, and this is what this plugin allows you to do. So, for me personally, I like very clicky, tactile feeling things. So, with the keyboard I showed earlier in the desktop mode, listen to that. Got cheap blue switches in it, and I fucking love the clickiness. I wanted something that sounded a little bit like that, but was also kind of similar to the Switch. You can get the Switch UI sounds on this, which I think is quite cool, but the one I use is actually one called Tactile UI. What this does is it sort of gives it that feeling of clickiness, which I really, really appreciate. I'm sorry if you just heard that motorbike, fucking hell, that was loud. What this does is it gives you the tactile feeling that I might enjoy, so if I do this now, you can see it sounds a lot sharper and a lot more tactile, and I really, really like it. It's really good quality. You may notice that the one we're also hovered over now isn't for the UI sounds, but is in fact for music. Now, if you've used a PlayStation in the past 20 years, you might notice that, I don't know, the background or the home screens on them will have some form of ambience or music, and this is what this tries to emulate. So, for me, I have the most nostalgic memories with either the PS3 or 4. Unfortunately, the PS3 didn't really have any sort of ambience other than when it booted up, but the PS4 and PS5 subsequently definitely had music. So I like to use this one that is, for some reason, called PS3 menu music, even though it actually relates to the PS4 home menu. And quite literally, it just plays that. You can obviously adjust the individual volume in these to your liking, so it's a really cool addition and gives you that extra sense of personalization, which is obviously what we're trying to go for here. The next one we're going to show is CSS Loader. Now basically what this does is it allows you to sort of emulate console themes. So the PS4 especially had loads of different console themes that changed the background and the UI noises and the way things looked. It was a really, really cool addition, and I'm pretty, the PS3 even had these. Why am I saying the PS4 invented this? It didn't. Please, Sony, bring it back on the PS5. I fucking beg. But yeah, from here, what you can do is you can sort of install loads of different presets. So for me, these are just the ones I installed. They're pretty normal, but you can change this to sort of any theme you want. So for me, I'm a pretty big fan of Persona 5 Royal. It's actually my third favourite game of all time, next to Ratchet & Clank and Metal Gear Solid 2. And so I wanted something that emulated the feel of a sort of device the Phantom Thieves themselves would use. So I installed this. It's just called Phantom, and what it does is it changes the background to that iconic red you see in Persona 5, as well as some of the sort of off quadrilateral shapes that you would see in that game with the aesthetic and the art style they were going for, and it makes it sort of fit that overall aesthetic. Combine this with the audio loader, and you can also get Persona 5 music and UI noises to go along with this. Combine this with the animation changer. You can also get a boot screen that sort of fits with this theme specifically, so you could turn this device into a very, very just sort of Persona 5 oriented device. I don't really prefer to do that myself, but I can see why someone might. It's the fact that you can have all of these combinations and make it really your own unique device, unlike anybody else's. It's such a cool concept to me that is just not done enough with technology nowadays. The one I use, however, primarily is called Switch Like Home, and basically what that does is this: it makes the game sit more near the bottom of the screen, clears the screen up a bit to make it look like the Switch Home UI. I really like the Switch's software overall. I think that's why I try to replicate it so much. This isn't it for the plugins, however. A couple of the next plugins I'm going to show you are going to be very useful for all the games in your Steam library, and one of them is going to be useful for some of them, but definitely those emulator games that I mentioned previously. Those two plugins are these, Proton DB Badges and SteamGrid DB. These will be the two we just look at now. Let's go over SteamGrid DB first. So if we go over to the non-Steam games, as you can see I have all of my emulators in here, plus Firefox that I decided to add through the desktop Steam app as a Steam program. It's just so I can access the browser without having to directly launch into desktop mode every time. It's convenient. As you can see, I've got nice artwork for these games, and especially for the Ratchet & Clank quadrilogy, they all sort of line up pretty well, fitting a theme. What I did with this is I installed SteamGrid DB, so if you just press the options button or the start button, whatever the fuck you want to call it, and scroll up until you see change artwork. This will take you to the SteamGrid DB page, and will obviously link whatever the search function is to whatever game you're going for. So for this at the moment, it is Ratchet & Clank 2 Going Commando. This means it will give me all of these things involving Ratchet & Clank 2 that I can install to make them look better on my device. It's just a lot better than the default picture it might give you, which sometimes actually correlates to the wrong game because, it's not perfect. It can just make things look a lot more official and a lot more personalized to you. And for someone with technology OCD like myself, that is a very, very good addition, and I strongly recommend getting it, because some of the games in your Steam library as well haven't all been updated to when Steam overhauled their look in 2020. This means that some of the capsules can look off and look a bit stretched and not fit with the overall new art panel aesthetic they're going with, so with SteamGrid DB, you can actually change them to sort of fit the new art style, and I really like that. Proton DB is probably one of the most useful plugins you can get with DeyLoader, and that is because it actually tells you what games will work and which ones won't with Proton. Before we get into this though, let's briefly explain what Proton is. Proton is actually a translation layer for Linux that allows Windows games to be playable without a native Linux port. This isn't perfect, however, which is exactly why Proton DB exists. Proton DB will show you how well these games run on your Linux device, with it going from balked, which means that it does not work well at all, to platinum, which means that it should run absolutely fine without any tweaks whatsoever. This can really open up your Steam library a lot more for you, as some games that are marked as unknown or even unsupported can work almost flawlessly. This may not be entirely accurate, however, as Proton is constantly being updated, so some new updates might break things. A good example of this for me would actually be Dirt 3. As you can see right here, the little icon next to the game at the bottom shows us that the game is actually unsupported. Now, what this would usually mean is someone would look at this and think, crap, it's unsupported, I can't really play this. But if I go into the game, it says gold, so it's clearly working on some Linux devices. If you click on the Gold tab, it will actually take you to the Proton DB page and automatically open the Steam Deck tab. From here, you can see what other people are saying about the game to see how it runs. This is where I learned that it actually ran fine straight out of the box, and so the unsupported tag, while there, didn't actually mean anything. And as you can see, I played it for a little bit just to test it, and everything worked fine. It might be worth taking a look at the Proton DB forums if you're interested to see how to get some games to work if they don't work out of the box. As I've just showed you, you can access them by pressing the little badge on the top left of the game whenever you open them to their full screen. Well, that's basically it for the software. There are a few other tweaks you can do, but these are going to be the main ones for the average deck user, and so the others, while important for other things, may not be important for what you're using the deck for. Feel free to go and look up what other ones may have, however. You might find something that you might find infinitely useful, but I didn't find useful at all. After all, maximizing your deck in any way can make it feel a lot more worth it to you. Now for the hardware. This is probably what a lot of you have been waiting for. And this might be a little more technical as it goes slightly in depth as to what makes the Steam Deck work, but I will try and simplify it as much as I can. As I stated before, both the LCD and OLED models have the same chip with the AMD RDNA 2 APU, with the only difference being that the OLED model is slightly more efficient, with it being 6nm compared to the LCD model's 7nm. I couldn't really find a decent way to explain this normally, so I'll just explain what it can do. So the lower number in this case is better, as the smaller distance usually allows for more transistors to be packed within it, making it slightly more efficient and improving the chip's capabilities overall. The difference will basically be negligible, however, in gaming performance, but you might notice it a bit more on things like the battery life. Speaking of the battery, however, the LCD model comes in at a 40 Wh or 5200 mAh battery, with the OLED model coming in at a 50 Wh or 6400 mAh battery, which is a fairly big improvement over the LCD model itself, but considering the power of the little AMD APU inside of both of these devices, that battery doesn't last very long. Before we go into this any further, however, I do just want to say that I don't think you should take these base specs alone as a guide on which model to get if you're looking at investing in one. I will go over my recommendation later once we've covered everything, but for now, let's continue. Both Steam Deck models come in at 16GB of LPDDR5 RAM, but the OLED model slightly edges out over the LCD, with the RAM being at 6400 megatransfers instead of the LCD's 5500 megatransfers. Again, this difference may seem fairly big, but unless you are a hardcore tech literate person, you aren't really going to notice any difference. The screen on both models will definitely be what stands out to you the most, considering the models are actually named after what type of screen they have. I can safely say it'll be the thing that draws your attention first, and that is completely fair enough. This, after all, is the sort of thing that people will look out for when it comes to a device like this with a built-in display. The display on the LCD model comes in at 7 inches with a 60Hz refresh rate with obviously an LCD screen, while the OLED model comes in at a 7.4-inch display with the refresh rate of 90Hz, and you will not believe this at all, an OLED display. I know, crazy. For those of you that don't know the difference between OLED and LCD displays, it's the way the screens themselves are actually lit. LCD displays are lit via a backlight, which means that whenever the screen goes black, light is always being pushed through the screen, making the contrast ratio worse than OLED screens, which are lit pixel by pixel and are essentially turned off whenever parts of the screen go black, which gives them the much more vibrant colour range as well as the deeper blacks that LCD screens lack. Unfortunately, even though OLED is better than LCD, they are a lot more expensive to produce, which usually gets added onto the price of the product in which it's being featured in. Also, the risk of screen burning. While OLED technology has gotten a lot better since its inception, there are always still risks of the screen having some form of damage after a while when compared to something like an LCD panel. For those of you that might not know the differences between LCD and OLED screens, then I'll quickly go and grab my switches for the best example I can give. So, the OLED model's at the top because it has the slightly bigger screen with the less bezel, and the LCD one's at the bottom. Now, they're both running at the same brightness. If anything, I think this one's actually running a little brighter than this, but this one instantly looks way more vibrant. The colours pop up a bit more, but at the end of the day, is it something you're really going to notice after 10 to 20 minutes of immersive play sessions? I don't think so. The OLED model is also a lot brighter, at 1000 nits instead of the LCD model's 400. This could be sort of seen to be an expected improvement, as we just showed on the switches. You know, the LCD model, even though I had the brightness set a little bit higher, definitely looked dimmer. This still doesn't mean loads, however, as the LCD model is still very bright in the areas it needs to be. Jesus Christ, I'm really coping here. Fucking hell. For the astute of you, you may have also noticed that these displays are also touchscreens. This is not exclusive to the LCD model, as the OLED model also has this. This means you can navigate menus in some games a lot easier than you would be able to on a controller. I know it also probably seems obvious, but this touchscreen also works in desktop mode. I know we touched upon the storage earlier when comparing it to the Switch, but I'll quickly go over again for the 3 people that are still watching this video. The LCD models have 3 tiers each, featuring different storage options starting at 64GB of eMMC storage, with the next 2 models having 256GB and 512GB of SSD storage. It's not the greatest considering the size of some of the games that exist now. Like, you're going to have to buy the 512GB if you want to install Ark with all the DLC. That thing's like 350 gigs, it's fucking weird. However, this is perfectly serviceable when you consider the microSD card storage that appears on both models. The OLED model, however, starts out at 512GB SSDs, with the higher tier model having 1TB of SSD storage. The 256GB SSD model, as well as the 2 OLED models, are now the only 3 models you can buy new. This means that the 64GB and the 512GB LCD models have been discontinued. You can definitely still find some of them second-hand or refurbished through Valve themselves. The refurbished decks are slightly harder to get hold of, however, as they are often not in stock and tend to be sold out fairly quickly when brought back into stock. The Wi-Fi chip on the OLED model has also been improved over its LCD counterpart. The LCD model boasts a decent Wi-Fi 5 chip, while the OLED model boasts an even better Wi-Fi 6E chip, allowing for more consistent coverage and speed over the LCD model. Both models, as you will see here, have two touchpads located on either side of the screen. These can be used in both gaming and desktop mode, with incredible compatibility with both modes. Using the right touchpad in a game allows you to essentially move the in-game camera like a mouse, allowing for more accurate cursor movement and camera movement. Combining the use of analog sticks as well as this is something I wish more companies would experiment with. Using the sticks as well as the touchpads in tandem can work incredibly well in games that require some more accurate movements. The touchpads also have a little haptic feedback sensor that can make using them feel infinitely more tactile and immersive. It's a really cool addition and something so small that I'm surprised they even included it. The Steam Deck also have, on both models, 4 programmable buttons on the back. These are the perfect positions for them, as when you're holding the device, the ergonomics sort of force you to put your ring finger and your middle finger on both hands over these buttons, allowing you to press them really easily. You can change what the trackpads do in any game, as well as the programmable buttons. Oh, also, did I mention that this has a gyro inside it? You can gyro aim with this thing, especially useful on some games in which the touchpad you don't have enough surface area, and I mean, it's very hard to get used to, but it does work. You know, you can change what the gyro does in any game as well. They're all perfectly modular for what you want to do in any game. You know, it's such a nice addition, and I'm glad that they haven't just taken, oh, let's slap a screen on a controller and let's do something from there. They've actually innovated on the controller side and made it a lot more accessible, and you can do loads with it. Like, it's really good. While I don't use all these features that often, I'm glad that they are there, so I can use them should I so wish. Now that we've talked about the hardware that powers this thing, I'd like to talk a bit about the best hardware mods you can do in order to improve your Steam Deck and make the ultimate powerhouse of a gaming machine. So, before we take the Steam Deck apart, let's take a look at the easiest upgrade you can possibly add to this thing. The SD card. The SD card is definitely the easiest and most effective way to exponentially increase your storage with ease. You can increase it up to 400% if you buy the standard 512GB model. All you have to do is take the SD card, this is my one here, and simply insert it into the bottom like that. Hey presto, you've just got extra fucking half a terabyte of storage. You know, it's simple. That's it. No taking the back off with a specific screwdriver that you need to buy from a black market dealer who requires at least 40% of your left hand and your left eyeball as payment. Just slide that bad boy in and you can have up to 2 terabytes of extra storage. Now, you may be thinking that SD cards are so unbelievably slow and not good when it comes to running Skyrim with 500 different porn mods, but you'd actually be wrong. I'm not sure how Valve managed to infuse the power of God himself into this device, but they have optimized external storage so well that loading times, while slower, are nowhere near as bad as you'd expect. It's one of those where you won't even notice it after about 15 to 20 minutes of consistent play. I actually just want to quickly show you the back of the Steam Deck properly before we take it off and show the internals. This is genuinely one of the best ways to allow your users to take apart the product. Just 8 simple screws, 4 along the top, 4 along the bottom, and they just require a simple crosshead screwdriver. I'm using this iFixit one, but you know, you can find these in like McDonald's Happy Meals, so you probably have them everywhere. I believe that the OLED model actually uses Torx screws instead of the regular crosshead screws, which is a bit more difficult to navigate, but most screwdriver sets have Torx screw bits, so it's still fairly easy. Ask your dad, I'm sure he's got some lying about. I just love how accessible it is to take the back off of this device. Valve really want to show you that this is your device and you can do what you want with it. You know what? Well done, Valve. Absolutely fantastic design. Now, without further ado, let's get into this bad boy. Actually, before we get started, I'm just going to show you a quick thing you're going to need to do if you are doing one of these upgrades. So, in order to get to this screen, this is your BIOS screen, so you want to make sure the Steam Deck is completely powered off, and then when you're certain it's off, hold the volume up button and then press the power button. From there, once you know it's launching and you see the boot logo, you should just be in this screen. So from here, go to Setup Utility, and then go to Power and enter Battery Storage Mode. From here, what it'll do is it will basically just turn the deck off and make sure that there's no power that can be provided to the system while this is on. I know this may seem a bit backwards as you're thinking, well, how the hell do I turn it back on? All you want to do is just plug in your AC power and then press the power button if it doesn't start automatically, and it should just work normally out of the box again. But you will need to do this if you're taking apart the Steam Deck and disconnecting the battery, which you will definitely need to do for one of these upgrades. Oh yeah, another thing about this quickly before we get into it, I know I'm interrupting a lot, but they also, it's not mandatory, you don't have to do this, but they do recommend that your battery is at least 80% power level or below before you enter battery saver mode, so just keep that in mind. You know, this is surprisingly hard to do with fucking gloves on. You're probably thinking, why don't I just take these off? But, hey, my style, boys. Ooh, I hate doing that. Oh, God, I hate doing that. Ooh, Jesus Christ, that never feels good. So, as you can see here, the inside of the Steam Deck looks fairly intricate. There's a lot going on in this small space, and it's actually quite impressive to see how they've managed to squish all of this stuff in here. This is only the LCD model, however, and I believe it's the first version of it, so there is a slightly updated version of the LCD that I think does look slightly different on the inside, but it's still basically the same. I'm not so sure about the OLED model though, although I do believe that is also very similar. If we remove this plate right here, we can see the first upgrade that we're actually going to attempt, so let's just do that quickly. Okay. So, now that we've pried that off, we can also see a lot more things here. So, I mean, yeah, before you could see the fan. So, the copper pipe leading under here, this is where our little APU sits. We're not going to be touching that. This is where we're going to be going. So, this under here is the SSD. I know, it's fucking tiny, just look at it. It just sits there. So, I've already done this. You may recognise if you've taken yours apart before, this doesn't have this copper plate in it originally. I actually purchased this from Amazon so I could use it on my new SSD, which is this. The Western Digital fucking SN770M with a whopping 5,150 megabytes read speed, which is way better than the original SSD, which I believe has just under 2,000, which is very slow for an SSD, personally, for me. So, because I've already changed it, I'm not actually going to take this apart, therefore I'm not going to disconnect the battery or anything, but if you did want to do this on this model specifically, you're going to want to pull up this little tab here, and the way that this works is it's mostly all ribbon cables in here. You just want to pull that out. Once you know that there's no power being delivered to the system, you can then unscrew this, take that out, and put it wherever. I've got this cute little thing wherever the fuck it is. It's a little SSD enclosure, so I put the original one in this, and I can just take this out and about, and now I have 500 extra gigabytes of storage. It's pretty nifty. Once you've slotted it in, you know, put your new heatsink on. I wouldn't actually recommend putting another SSD in without some form of heatsink, whether it be thermal pads or like thermal pads and then a heatsink like this. Like I say, this was only about £8 on top of the £90 I spent on the SSD. You know, it's not really a dent and makes all the difference. You know, the original one has some form of heat shielding on it, so putting a new one in without any could damage your system. So don't do that. You know, once that's in, all you got to do is take this panel and lovingly put her back on like I have, and we'll get on to the next upgrade. So yeah, now that your panel's back on, oh, fuck ass, I know what I've done. Yeah, I got lucky this time. Don't forget to take out your SD card, because it sits flush with the back, so it can break quite easily. Now that your panel's back on, you can see that everything's fine. You know, your SSD's in there. Make sure to reconnect the battery if you haven't, because obviously, if you haven't, then it ain't gonna work, is it? So, yeah, you've done that, everything's back on. It's time for probably the easiest upgrade of them all. Before we talk about it, however, I want to tell you a small story. You know, the battle between gamers and stick drift has been an epic one since the inception of the analog stick. It's been around for as long as they've existed, but we've only recently just given it a name, stick drift, since the Switch and how infamous their Joy-Cons and sticks are. The default Steam Deck sticks are no different. While mine weren't awful with the stick drift, it was definitely noticeable after a few minutes of gameplay, and so I decided to get these. You can't really see what they are because some bastard lovingly decided to put the label over it, but these are actually the Ghoulie Kit Hall Effect Joystick Replacements for the Steam Deck. Now, because of how modular this device is, you know, it is incredibly easy to change. So all if you want to take these out, is make sure to get something like these tweezers, pull up these little tabs, pull out the ribbon cables on each side, and then there are just 1, 2, 3 screws on each side that you need to take out. Once those things are all out, then they should just pop out easily. Now, as I mentioned, these are Hall effect joysticks. So what Hall effect is it basically uses contactless operation within the joystick in order to determine the position of the stick. When, compared to the potentiometer that the regular joysticks use, obviously the potentiometer requires contact, and so they tend to decay after a little while. The Hall effect ones, because they're contactless, means that they last much, much longer. And also, from what I've seen and heard, they're a bit more precise, lowering it off a dead zone and a bit more sensitivity, so they can actually be useful in games. Please note actually, before you replace these, there's something you need to check within the settings. I'll quickly show you how to do this. I'm unsure if this is necessary for the OLED model though, but this is just for the LCD. So, when you're in your Steam Deck, I know I've still got the back off, and I said not really to do that, but you kind of need to for these upgrades, and anyway, do as I say, not as I do. So press the Steam button in the bottom left, go to Settings. From here, go to System and scroll all the way down until you see Steam Deck Controller ID. From here, look at the first 4 letters. For me, it is MEDA. It'll either be this, or I'm pretty sure the other one is MHDA. I don't know what these actually mean, but all I know is that they are 2 different types of controller or a joystick ID that they use. And you will obviously need to flick, or there's little switches on the back of these analog sticks, which I'll show you in a minute, that you need to flick into either A or B that corresponds to MEDA or MHDA. So, it's something that's worth noting before you go into this device. Right, so as I mentioned, on the back of these, there are little switches on either side. So with this one here, obviously, they're right near the top. They're right near the L and the R. So they're very easy to spot. And you'll notice a little A and B on the side. I bought these off Amazon, and on Amazon, it said A was MEDA and B was MHDA. So, I instantly just flicked them to A. I'm pretty sure they were already on A, so if they are on MEDA, you don't need to worry. It's just more for sort of if you have a different model, but, I'm glad that they're here. This will allow better compatibility with the sticks and sort of give you the full reach of their sort of power instead of limiting them. I don't know what happens if I flick it to B, but I don't really want to mess around with it. I'm also not going to take these sticks out, as I was an idiot and had some trouble with them, so I will show you the original sticks instead, because, they're still fairly easy to understand. And there you go. There's one of the originals. This is the right, I think. Yes, it is. So yeah, look at that. That's all it is. Isn't it cute? Before you actually put the new ones in, I recommend just taking the top off of the new ones, checking this wire isn't getting caught, because I've had to take these out like 2 or 3 times when initially putting them in because the wire was caught and I was an idiot. And then obviously just give it a quick few circular motions to see if nothing's caught. Once you're certain that everything's fine, then you can just screw them back in. Some people have reported issues with these, but they are usually fixed by, I don't know, giving them circular motions, and I know it seems a bit backwards, but actually pressing them in quite hard. Once they're firmly in, it shouldn't matter. Obviously, don't do it too hard to the point they break, but you should feel, if you are having issues, like a click, and then everything should move smoothly. I had to do this with only the left one, however, the right one was fine, although I did have to take this one out because it was caught in the cable. So your experience, your mileage may vary, so just keep these in mind in the case that you do have these problems. So yeah, that's basically all that is for the installation process. Okay, so once you've got your new Ghoulie Kit sticks in, you might notice on the back, let me quickly show you before we get into this. On either side on each stick, just near the ribbon cable, there'll be a little button here and here. Now, what these are for is basically your sort of calibration. So they might not be perfectly calibrated from the get-go. I've had to do mine, so you might very well have to do yours. It can be an annoying process, but it's definitely worth doing. So in the controller option in your settings tab, basically just scroll down, go into calibration and advanced settings, and then you'll notice the left and right joysticks options here. Just press Y to test these when in there, and then you can calibrate the dead zone. So like I say, you should have a little bit less of a dead zone on these sticks, but it might not be perfect. And if they're not as centered as you'd like them to be, just, I don't know, counteract the movement. So if it's in the top right, move it down to the bottom left a bit, and then press that button on the corresponding stick. So this would be the right stick, I'd press the right button, and it should center it a bit more. There is actually another way you can calibrate these in the desktop mode that's a bit more extensive, but I'm not going to go through that here because this video's gone on long enough already and it is roasting in this room, and I'll be honest, I want to be done. So, once you've done installing everything and you've verified that the analog sticks fit and everything feels right, then you are good to just put the back on and then go to the next step. Ooh. Oh, it feels like breaking my ankle every fucking time. It's awful. So, you've put everything back together, and if you've installed a new SSD drive, you're going to have to do what I did. You're basically going to have to go onto their website, make sure you have like an external drive, like a USB that's at least 8 gigs, or even if you have a caddy, utilize the old SSD. You're going to need to install the Steam Deck recovery image. Basically what this does is it allows you to sort of re-image your new SSD into SteamOS. It's a very useful tool that Valve supplies on their own website with a simple Google search. They also provide a written tutorial there if that's easier to follow for you. But should you need a video tutorial, I'm not going to do it because, like I say, it's a little bit of a lengthy process, but there are definitely tons of tutorials out there on YouTube to watch. So, provided you've done that, or you didn't upgrade the SSD at all, now that your Steam Deck is graded with some new Hall effect sticks, you know, you're going to want some accessories and stuff as well, right? You know what? Let's talk about that. The Steam Deck is such a versatile device that can work well with tons and tons of different types of accessories that can enhance your experience in many different ways. One of those main accessories people would invest in is this, a dock. Now, even Valve knew that this would be a huge addition, as this is their official dock, which I both would and wouldn't recommend. The reason I would is because the compatibility between the Steam Deck and the official dock is going to be top tier, as Valve is putting their own hardware into another piece of their own hardware. It's going to work, and it does incredibly well. The dock actually works with most of my other Type-C devices. I actually use this, my Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 5 that I just have as a spare at the moment because I'm not using it. I know, I have all of this fucking tech that I'm just not using. I'm such a spoiled brat. The reason I use this in my dock, however, is because it allows me to use Samsung DeX, which basically allows me to see this as a mini PC-like device, and I use it to have YouTube videos on while I sleep. So, it fits quite well in the dock, and because of the size of the phone, you know, it doesn't move anywhere, you know, it's pretty good. So even if you have a dock and you don't exclusively use your deck with it, it'll pretty much work with anything. It's a very versatile accessory that obviously is useful for something like this, but isn't absolutely necessary for something like this. Also, that compatibility with other devices definitely isn't a sort of Steam Deck, like, you know, exclusive thing, it's just more of an observation. The reason I don't recommend this, however, is because of the price. In the UK, this is actually £70 brand new directly from Steam. And while it has many ports and features, it is a very steep price considering you can get a third-party one from Joysticks for £30, which has the exact same features. You can even get a dock on Amazon that has a full-sized M.2 slot for £50. You know, like, granted the compatibility may not be as good, but to be able to have another SSD that you could install something like Windows on for £20 less than this is just insane. I personally enjoy the official dock, however, as I know exactly what I'm getting from it. Also, the colour scheme and the way it sort of looks fits well with the deck's overall aesthetic, with the whole minimalist vibe, so I think it works quite well. A lot of you out there, however, may not have the funds for such a thing, or may not want to get something that is that expensive, so from that point of view, fair enough. I would recommend getting a dock though. The ability to plug in all of your peripherals and a monitor in order to use the desktop mode in its full ability is a really nice experience. You could fully use the Steam Deck alone for your own regular PC and then just move it around when you need to. I'm going to crack out something else here. Now, it's something I just used earlier, so you may already have know what this is and seen this, but say for instance a dock is a bit too high profile for you. You may sort of want one of these specifically. This is a USB hub. This does almost the exact same things, like occasionally with some different ports, but you know, it takes up a lot less space. I have mine, this one, basically velcroed to the back of this little thing here, which sits on the back of my Steam Deck. As you can sort of see from earlier, all it does is it just clips on the back, and now I have a battery pack and a USB-C hub on, like, for on the go. It's really useful. You know, something like this is great, especially if I'm just in desperate need of a quick setup. The fact that you can just do that with this device is absolutely amazing. Speaking of peripherals though, you may want to invest in something like a cheap mouse or a cheap keyboard. So for me, from earlier, as you saw, I used this old Logitech G502. Now this was the mouse I used to use on my primary PC, until I upgraded to this mouse here, but I now use this for my Steam Deck. I used to have an old Razer mouse, but unfortunately, because it's Razer, it's shit and it crapped out on me. I also use this dirt cheap mechanical keyboard. I'm pretty sure this just has some cheap blue switches in it like I mentioned earlier, but listen to that clickiness. Now, this keyboard isn't exactly the greatest. I don't know if you can see, you probably can't. The letters are really hard to see. Now, I know I sort of remember where things are, but I've only recently just started using this keyboard with my primary PC. I used to use a proper full-size one, so I'm not sort of used to the whole format and aspect of this yet. And because of that, I need to sort of look down where the keys are sometimes, but if I can't see them, I can't really do much. So I initially bought this for the Steam Deck, but I sort of thought I can just disconnect the cable and use it. But yeah, I use this as a spare because it's wireless. It's nice to have if I'm in bed or something and I have this connected to my monitor. You know, it's handy and it does look nice. It sort of resembles a sort of Keychron looking keyboard, which, you know, I really like their designs. It's really nice to be able to have a portable setup. Actually, you know what? I'll actually throw an image on screen now of when I went to Insomnia Gaming Festival sort of this time last year. I only went for a day or so, and so I didn't bring my full PC setup or anything, but decided to bring my Steam Deck with some peripherals. It was a little difficult to see anything without a monitor, but being able to play Left 4 Dead 2 with my friends on such a small device was such a cool feeling. I had the weakest device basically in the room. You had everybody there at least with some form of laptop, or you had them there with like SLI 4090s and a fucking fat 4K ultra-wide monitor. But you know what? I didn't feel jealous of them. I had this because it was simple. I could carry it about anywhere and it worked. It did exactly what I wanted it to do. And it was brilliant. It was such a cool experience. I think as well, being the only person that I could see with a setup like this, you know, just made things feel so much more unique to me, and one of the main reasons why I love this device. The fact that you can use this as a handheld PC, a PC, or just a regular console, you know, it's such a versatile device and such a great thing that Valve did. You know, after showing that image, I do want to show something else, another peripheral that you may want. A controller. Now, these aren't imperative considering the Steam Deck itself already has a controller, quite an extensive controller that has more features than your regular DualSense, but these are definitely useful. Say for instance, you want to hook your Steam Deck up to your dock. I'm not going to bother plugging everything in, so you've got it up to your monitor, right? You're not going to want to pick this up and use it with the short cable. If you don't want to play a game that has, you know, mouse controls, or you play a game that doesn't support mouse controls, you can sit back with your controller and think, you know what, this Steam Deck's alright. It's like it's basically a really cheap version of the Switch's removable controllers. You can just set this down in a dock and then you can sit back with an external controller. It's not something that you need for this, just like with any of this really, but it's something that's definitely worth getting and will enhance your experience should you need it. It's one of those things where I would rather have it and not need it than not have it and really want it. So yeah, it's definitely been useful for me more than a few times, so I'd recommend getting one, even if it's a cheap one. Yeah, I do apologise if things look different, actually, now that before we finish this segment. My phone actually ran out of storage because of the resolution and frame rate I'm recording this in, so I've had to put it over to an SSD and then start recording again, so I am sorry if it looks different. If you want to be a bit more ostentatious, however, you may want to invest in a shell replacement for the deck to give it some real extra flair. I've heard that a full shell replacement is incredibly difficult to do, considering you have to disassemble the entire thing in order to get the shell free. It's very time consuming and is, even from professionals, I've heard it's very, very hard. It's one of those where you'll also have to heat and remove the screen, which can be a fairly dangerous process, so it definitely isn't one that's on the cards for me personally. I'm not overly confident with my ability when it comes to working with something as flimsy as a screen. If you are and you want to do this, then go for it. There are, however, such things as a replacement for just the back part of the shell, like the one that we took off when we initially showed what was inside the deck. These usually actually have a bit more cutouts on the back, so this can actually improve airflow a little bit, and they can also extend the rear buttons slightly, so if you want any of those, then be sure to try and pick one of those up. I do want to get one of these myself at some point, but there is a major downside to changing any aspect of the shell, and that is that you are sacrificing the strong plastic that the Steam Deck is already made out of. Like, this thing is durable right out of the box and fits together extremely well. Changing the back shell only could run the risk that it doesn't fit as well as the original, and that it isn't as strong in the case I did drop it. It's one of those to do if you're confident in your abilities and possibly have a case to counteract how it fits and feels. Another accessory you may want to invest in is a screen protector. For someone like me who doesn't like using devices with cases as it takes away from the original ergonomics and feel, a screen protector can still offer a sense of protection without compromising that original feel that the producers were going for. While I've never had a fatal drop on anything I've put a screen protector on, I'm still glad I have one, as it gives me that peace of mind knowing that if I did drop it and it lands on the screen, I'm probably still protected. And hey, they're cheap as well. Also, if you didn't buy the 512 gig and still want that anti-glare finish, then you can definitely find that in a screen protector. These ones basically did that. Getting that added protection at an extremely low profile while getting that anti-glare finish at such a low price can be an almost irresistible addition to your accessory collection. And I don't know if this is just a personal thing, but I think the anti-glare on the screen protector actually looks better than the anti-glare that they put in with the screen. While I don't have one of these myself, I do plan on getting one at some point for a multitude of reasons. One of the main ones being the Steam Deck itself. The accessory I am referring to, of course, is a portable monitor. Something small, but bigger than the original 7-inch display that can allow you to have a screen that can be a little sharper and easy to use. The beautiful thing about the Steam Deck is that you can buy them with broken screens for dirt cheap. And if you don't want to deal with the whole screen replacement, as it can be quite invasive with a chance of doing more damage, you may just want to connect it to a big monitor, or even better, a portable monitor with like a keyboard or something to get a sort of small laptop-like experience. With the monitors being slightly smaller than full-size ones, you can get away with the lower resolutions being passable, as the smaller pixel density and the screen size will counteract a lot of the poor quality experiences, especially with gaming. Maybe it's one of those, as I say, you can combine with something like a Microsoft Surface Pro keyboard that has a little thing on it that you can slot things in. You know, you can get that laptop experience without having to pay an arm and a leg for a gaming laptop. And you can find some decent portable monitors that are about 1080p for about £100 that will serve the purpose you're looking for. Final thing you may want to invest in is one of these, a battery pack. There are tons of options you can go with. I only have this simple one that I purchased for about £10 from B&M about 2 years ago. I only got the specific one due to its thinness and low profile when it came to attaching it to my Steam Deck. There are many other options you can go with should you decide you just want one in a bag where you have a long cable connected to it, or if you want something to have in your car or whatnot. There are many good choices with proper ports that have fast charging. My one unfortunately does not, so I only really use it if I want the battery to drain slower. Still works perfectly well, and even has a little display on the front to tell you how much battery is left within it. But with 2 USB-A charging ports as well as a Type-C and micro USB to charge the pack itself, for £10, I know who's winning. I do want to get a better one at some point, but it just goes to show that you don't need a crazy price one in order to achieve the same or at least similar results. With these accessories, you can really create a device that will stand the test of time, and will allow you to potentially have an entire PC with the aspects of productivity you need, but then changes into a neat little portable gaming machine. There's a couple small tips I would recommend to change in order to make your Steam Deck gaming experience slightly more responsive. Much earlier in this video, I talked about the quick access menu you can access by pressing this button on the bottom right of the device here. While I said that it's not actually necessary to use a lot of these features, I also did say that it's definitely worth taking a little bit of time to learn some of those features. I'm going to quickly show you how to get some more battery life out of your device. So, going back to Left 4 Dead 2, I'm going to show you probably one of the first things you're going to want to change, and that is the refresh rate of your game. Now, I know that I said earlier that I'm one of the degenerate bastards that vomits at the thought of 30 FPS, and while that is true, I did actually come to a realization after getting this console. I did discover that playing on refresh rates below 60 but above 30 is definitely still a playable experience. Before, when I used to play on console, primarily my PS3 or 4, it was either locked to 60 or locked to 30, nothing in between. The Steam Deck, however, allows you to change it to whatever you want, from 60Hz to 10, or 90 to, I'm assuming, 10 on the OLED. For whatever stupid fucking reason, I'm assuming if you want to play visual novels or something. When you get into a game, it might be worth seeing exactly what performance you get at the graphics settings you want. Obviously, higher settings will be worse performance, but some settings may not affect the performance as much, so you might want to find whichever ones work for you. You may notice that on some more modern and intensive titles, even if you choose the lowest settings available, performance will still be pretty choppy, only allowing you to get a max of 50 FPS or so. 50 FPS or even 40 FPS is still incredibly playable over 30 FPS. Let me just showcase some of the refresh rates off now and what I mean. So obviously, we're running at 60 right now. Everything's good, it feels responsive, it's smooth, I like this. Going down to 30 FPS in the settings, you can see that it is a lot choppier. Things feel a lot slower, and the input lag, it takes about a tenth to 2/10 of a second before my commands are actually registered in the game, which just does not feel good to me at all. The non-responsiveness of this frame rate is just, I can't deal with it. So after doing some tinkering, this is 40 FPS. So this is, it's fine. It's serviceable. It's better than 30 FPS, not as good as 50 or 60, sure, but the input lag is so much better than it is on 30, and with it only being 10 frames higher, it's so much easier for this little device to achieve. For those of you that played on a TV that didn't support 60Hz back in the day, like myself, you will have played on 50Hz quite a lot, but not noticed it, as most of the games you played felt smooth. This is 50 FPS right now. As you can see in the FPS counter, we are getting a steady 50 frames per second. It feels fine, it feels like 60. Probably in some areas you will notice it's not as smooth as 60, but from a responsiveness point of view, it is really, really nice to use. And this is what I tend to strive for in most sort of AAA intensive games. What I've learnt with this is that 50 or 40, even 40 FPS is still incredibly playable, much more playable than 30 FPS. The 10 FPS difference between 30 and 40 makes a huge difference that you wouldn't really expect, but that will definitely show in your gameplay. Lowering the refresh rate will also allow you to have a smoother experience, so if your game's stuttering between 45 and 50, lowering to just 45, or maybe even 40 if you think that's more comfortable, will allow for a much more stable frame rate and a more stable gaming experience overall. Lowering the refresh rate will also increase your battery life a little bit, as a display isn't having to work as hard. Once you've gotten comfortable with these settings, you may want to adjust the manual GPU clock or the TDP limit within the quick access menu. When these are at max, you get the best performance your Steam Deck can give, because the chip inside of this is an APU or an accelerated processing unit. This means that both the GPU and the CPU are located within the same component. Manually adjusting the GPU clock in your quick access will take some of the performance away from the GPU, but in turn put a bit more light on the CPU, which can be incredibly useful for games that are way more CPU bound. That includes games with a lot of NPCs or processes going on in the background, something like GTA 5 for example. It might be worth doing some research on games that you want to play or are playing to see what sort of components it stresses out more. This setting is also incredibly useful for emulators, as emulation in almost all senses on any device is very, very, very intensive on the CPU, so throwing a bit more light on the processor can give you some extra frames. It may seem a little backwards that kneecapping the GPU can give you more performance in some areas, but I promise that it does make sense. Changing the TDP limit is a little bit easier to understand and alter. For those of you that don't know what this is, the TDP is a measurement of power coming directly from the CPU. Simply, it means that if your Steam Deck is set to a maximum of 15 watts, then you will get the full 15 watts of power, but if you limit it to say 7, then only 7 watts of power will be output. In turn, this means that if you are outputting less power, the less battery will be used, therefore increasing your battery life. Again, this may seem backwards for those of you that aren't really techie, but I do promise that this makes sense. With the 60Hz screen that is featured on the LCD model, some older games like this actually have a display bottleneck. Now what this means is that the hardware inside of this device is capable of reaching more than 60 FPS, but the screen is limiting it to a maximum of 60 FPS, therefore giving you your bottleneck. Bottlenecks, especially in this case, aren't actually always a terrible thing, however, and I think it actually works quite well and is good for this device. What the TDP limit will allow you to do, especially on older games like this, as you can see I've lowered it to 5 watts. That means the Steam Deck is actually only outputting 5 watts of power instead of the maximum 15. This means it is technically using a third of the battery that it would be using should I have it at the full 15, but I'm still getting 60 FPS, because this game runs at higher than 60 FPS, but the 60Hz screen means that it's limited to that. Lowering this, if your game is technically more powerful than the display that is built into this, will actually really help in the long run. The best way to handle this is just lower the TDP limit until you start to see some dips in frames, because at which point the CPU is struggling to find that performance. Once you find that sort of perfect bit, so even with this now, I'm at 3 watts of power, the lowest it can go, and I'm still getting a steady 60 frames per second. It slowly dips into the high 50s, so what I'm going to do is put it back up to 5. Couple of notches up, that means it sort of counteracts any time the game can get a bit more hectic. This setting is fairly universal through a lot of games, even on more intensive ones. On the Callisto Protocol, I tend to run it at 50 frames per second because that is what the game can handle. I can also, well, it runs at about 55 sometimes, but it can dip, but I thought I'd get them more stable at 50. With this, there's a little bit more leg room, so I lowered the watts by 2 to 13. It's not much, but it means it's outputting 2 watts less power, which gives me a little bit of bump in battery life. It's definitely worth learning and tinkering around with. It's something you'll get used to after you've done it for a couple of games, so trust me, just stick with it and you will reap the rewards almost instantly. Overall, The Steam Deck smashes the Switch out of the water, completely, in my opinion. The better hardware, the extra features, the fact that it can play proper ports of games instead of the Xbox 360 version of fucking Mortal Kombat 1. Hell, the fact that it can not only play some Switch games on it, but it can play them better than the Switch itself before they even come out. Insane. To be fair though, I think the reason why the Steam Deck feels like such a great system is because it just feels magical to use. Granted, there is heavy competition now with such devices like the Lenovo Legion Go with its detachable controller design, or even the ROG Ally with its RGB and sleek design. Noticed anything about those though from the ones I said earlier? Lenovo and Asus, big names in the PC industry, are now getting in on this because they see a market. GPD and Ioneo before were just doing it because that was their sort of niche, their specialty. But now that Valve have come in and actually shown how it can be done, people know this is what they want. None of them, however, none of them that I've ever mentioned feel like the Steam Deck because of one thing and one thing only: SteamOS. The competition devices run primarily on Windows because people sort of think, Windows PC, that's what you want. You want to play Windows, you want to play every game on the go, don't you? Yeah, that's what you want, Windows. And yeah, while Windows is good for gaming, it's not built for it. It has things on it for gaming. It's not purpose-built for it though. SteamOS, on the other hand, is. Even with the competition, they have slightly better specs, and specs that have made me sort of think at some point, you know what, I want to upgrade. I want to get the ROG Ally. But I now realise I don't want that, because it doesn't have the software that is built for games. Even if I installed SteamOS on it, the AMD RDNA 2 chip inside this was built and tuned around SteamOS, so this will probably still run better than the ROG Ally with SteamOS. I have used Windows on a device like this before. In fact, I have used Windows on this very device before, and while it's serviceable for what I wanted to do with it, which was just play some Call of Duty on the go, I realised I don't play it enough, and also the experience really isn't what it's cracked up to be. So I went back to SteamOS. With my old Ioneo, I used to have that with Windows because that's what it came stock with. I liked it because I think I liked the device more than using the device. I liked the idea of it more. Once I got rid of it, never looked back. It sucked. Like, it was alright for what it was, but compared to this, it was shit. The fact that this is just such a light operating system, like, it's so unbloated, you could run this on fucking anything. I would actually recommend on older laptops to install SteamOS on that. Like, older laptops I think would suit SteamOS perfectly. It's light, it's easy, it's going to be able to take full advantage of the hardware in those older laptops instead of Windows taking up a third of it and instead kneecapping all performance. Like I said earlier, it functions exactly like your Xbox and PlayStation firmwares would. And you know the reason why, even though they have slightly worse specs, they still perform better than most PCs would? It's because of the optimization of the firmware. They are built to play games, just like this is. Yes, hardware is incredibly important, but people just forget that software is equally important, if not more important. The fact that you can build a PS4 in PC parts, install Windows on it, and it runs like shit on everything, but you put a PS4 firmware on it, it runs fine, because that's what that hardware was built to run for, because the software is so good. That's why I say this will always be better than the competition until the competition starts either putting SteamOS on their devices or making parts specifically tuned to it. Then Valve will have a problem. As it stands at this point, they really don't match the Steam Deck at all. You may see the fact that, I don't know, the ROG Ally's got a Ryzen 6850U and think, holy shit, that's a really powerful processor. Yeah, it is, and it's like an RDNA 3 thing, I think, but it's gonna feel so much more sluggish with a Windows install attached to it. This RDNA 2, it's gonna last for years. Now, I just want to quickly preface that this is not a Switch hate video. I know I've shat on the Switch a lot in this video, but I have two of the fuckers, for fuck's sake. Two of the those, like, instruments of gaming. Absolutely beautiful machines. While they're not as powerful as this, and they don't have a wider library as this, they still hold their place in the industry. But they just do not hold a candle to the Steam Deck. You know, if you have a Switch and you're debating of upgrading, I would, but I would keep your Switch, because it still has a place in the industry. This is just filling a different slot, while also sitting on the slot that Nintendo is. So it's sort of, yeah, it does what the Switch does, but the Switch also does what that specializes in a way better than this. It just fills up a smaller sort of fraction of that, if you will. Another good reason why this device, well, not even this device, but Valve in general are so great is Steam support. Like, Steam support are absolute gods, especially when it comes to this device. So, I had to use Steam support a little while ago for this device. I don't know what the problem was, I don't know what fixed it, I don't know what caused it, but basically, whenever I would put it to sleep and, I don't know, go to bed, wake up in the morning, turn this on, the entire left side of the system just did not respond to anything for a good, 20 minutes. Sometimes it needed a hard reset, sometimes it learned to initialize itself, but it was a problem. I got in contact with Steam support, and they told me a load of suggestions that would possibly help fix it, like, I don't know, do a system update. Obvious, yes, I know, but obviously they have to take into account not everybody is going to know this stuff. There were a load of things that they suggested, all of which I did, and one of them, unless all of them helped, that fixed it. It's now perfectly fine. They got back to me, by the way, in 2 hours. It was a problem at the start of the day, and it was fixed before lunchtime. That is insane. I messaged Rockstar support about an issue I had on Grand Theft Auto 3 years ago, and I'm still waiting to hear back from them. It's strange. I don't know if it's because with tech support I've been so accustomed to just expecting the bare minimum that when I'm shown some actual love and kindness by a company, it's really nice, but what Valve are doing is absolutely brilliant, and I don't think it's celebrated enough. So you know what? Well done, Valve. Good job. Honestly, if you have a thing like a problem with this device, get in contact with them. Valve support will be one of the biggest assets you have in trying to maintain this device and keeping it in tip-top shape. Saying all this, however, if you prefer the competition, great for you. If you have an ROG Ally and say, I used to have a Steam Deck, but I prefer this, absolutely fantastic for you. You know, that clearly works better for your tastes, but they just knew that this is so much easier to pick up, it's going to be so much quicker, and it just feels better in the hand, especially for me personally. I wanted an ROG Ally for the longest time, in 2023. Even when I had one of these, I got this at launch for the UK, so mid-2022. I had this for about a year, and I wanted the ROG Ally for the longest time because I saw the specs and was like, wow, that's going to be amazing. But then I recalled my time with the Aya Neo before I got the deck, and while I enjoyed the experience, like I say, it was more the idea of the experience that I enjoyed. The Windows layout just does not suit a handheld PC. I knew I would get a similar experience on the Ally, so I just don't care for it much anymore. If you do want to use Windows on that, however, or this, then great for you. Valve actually offers a tutorial on their own website with links to drivers that you need to get Windows functioning well on this device. They know that people will prefer that, which is completely fair. I just don't for a system like this. I also really rate how with a lot of companies, they're like, no, you must use our proprietary hardware that fucking sucks and actually kills your family if you do one thing out of line. But Valve are like, you know what? We know that people might not like SteamOS. It's too different from what they're used to, in a sense. Like, they might not want to get used to this. So we will provide them a guide to install Windows. They just have to do it themselves. Valve are really non-sticklers. Like, they're not sticklers at all for when it comes to this device and how you use it. After all, it is yours. You can do what you want with it, and Valve know that, so they help you do what you want with it, instead of being a bitch about it. Another main thing I mentioned was ergonomics, and now this device, fantastic ergonomics. One thing I do like to compare this to is the Wii U Pro controller. Does anybody remember that? Basically, the Wii U Pro controller was basically the best thing they did with that console, and it was the way it sat in your hand. Just hold out your hands in front of you for a second like this, and look where your thumbs are. Relax your hands, look where your thumbs are. They're in front of you, right? They're sort of sat this way, right? Now put the Steam Deck in your hands and sort of relax your hands. It fits exactly like that. It is relaxing in your hands. You don't have to tense the muscles or anything. It just sits there, and you can use this device for hours without even thinking about it. It's so convenient. It's one of the best designs for a controller I have ever seen, and I wish more companies would do it. Honestly, it's so underrated. With the fact that this device as well is built the way it is, a lot of the internals, like the important internals, are within this sort of area of the device, the middle of the screen. So when you are playing for a bit of time and you use the touchscreen, you're going to notice that it's a little bit hot to the touch. Not too much to the point where you're going to go, like, fuck, that really hurts, but it's going to be noticeable enough to think, okay, this device is getting hot. Because of this, however, this means that the controller sides are actually fairly clean of like components that get really hot. This means that it's even more comfortable to hold for long periods of time because it's not uncomfortable getting hot in your hands, you're not getting all sweaty and clammy. It's really, really good to hold for long periods of time when compared to something like the Switch, which was clearly built for the hands of like a fucking hedgehog or something. The fact that this device is bigger as well, it just means that the weight is so much more evenly distributed. I'm pretty sure this weighs about twice as much as the Switch, and yet this feels infinitely lighter. The only time you notice a difference is if you hold it in one hand. Two-handed, the Switch actually feels heavier, and that could be because of the fact the weight's more dense, but it's also the fact that you really have to sort of contort yourself to hold it, so you feel the weight more. You know, it's so important for devices like these, especially big ones like this, that, you know, you have the right ergonomics. And I know that obviously a lot of you might not have a Switch or a deck to understand this, so for my, American audience, my primarily American audience, I have something for you. This is a Glock 18. Now, I mean, these are one of the smaller handguns that exist, you know, they're meant to be sort of lightweight, easy to carry, but it's tiny compared to the Steam Deck. You know, the Steam Deck is very big to hold, but, I mean, it's not too big, per se. This was just a comparison, just so you understand. Another really great thing about this device is that Valve has said that taking this device apart does not void the warranty, which is just insane. Think about it. Every device you have, you take it apart, voids the warranty. Like, even if you're sort of designed to take it apart, it voids the warranty. With this, they're like, you want to do upgrades? Fucking go for it, lad. We'll even give you the tutorial how. Like, it's amazing how they really want this device to be yours. They know that they're not going to stop people, so they might as well be the good guy and sort of take the high ground in a good way. And that's exactly what they did. So, you know, if you want to do those upgrades that we discussed earlier, then please just go ahead and do it. You know, it's not going to void your warranty at all. And if you break anything, they actually have a partnership with iFixit, which means that you can buy singular replacement parts. And it's not like full boards or anything. They made this device as modular as they could on the inside. So if you break a little board, it's probably only a tiny thing that needs replacing for about $20 or something, instead of replacing the entire device for about $500. Like, it's so convenient and probably the best way a company has ever had a way to repair their devices, ever. And I mean ever. Now, it all comes down to this. Would I recommend one of these devices? Fuck yeah, of course I would. The real question about this, however, is what model would I recommend? And I know I'm definitely biased and coping, but I'm going to say the LCD primarily. The main reason you're going to be buying an OLED is if you really care about that screen and the visual fidelity, but the battery improvements, as I say, are so marginal that realistically you're only going to notice the increased capacity when playing really low intensity games, at which point you're not really taking advantage of the OLED screen and you're not really taking advantage of the 90Hz, so what's the point? And even if you're playing low intensity games on this, you're going to notice that the LCD has great battery life too. When you're playing something like Grand Theft Auto 5 or the Resident Evil 4 remake, for an example, the battery is going to be shockingly bad on both models. You may as well just invest in a battery pack for the LCD, as you probably have to do the same with the OLED anyway. Also, from a visual fidelity point of view, nobody is buying a Steam Deck for the absolute best looking experiences out there. They're buying it for the novelty of a Switch-like experience with the quality of their entire PC library on the go, which is just exactly what this device is out to do. You're rarely going to reach 60 FPS on any game in which higher frame rates matter, let alone the 90 FPS that the OLED supports. 60 is fine for games that can reach it, and 40 or so FPS is perfectly fine for games that can reach that. You're really going to notice the OLED in those, those 40 FPS games anyway, so what's the point of the 90? It just doesn't make sense. 90Hz is just so superfluous to what the deck can consistently provide on games in which the OLED screen would really benefit. Now, speaking of the screen itself, like, the actual different size of the screen, so the extra 0.4 inches you get with the OLED, while not hugely noticeable, will make things like FSR and the native 800p resolution actually worse. The smaller pixel density means you're going to notice aliasing more, you're going to notice, like, the worse graphics, like the blooming, or the blurring that FSR causes a bit more, and so it might actually end up hindering your game performance instead of improving it. Also, all of this, not to mention the hit on battery life having an extra 30 frames will have on your Steam Deck. Pricing is also one of the major selling points for these devices. The competition boasts similar, if not slightly better specs at almost $1,000 for the 1 sort of terabyte model. Now, granted, in order to get a terabyte stock, you have to pay about £570 for an OLED, which is a lot better, but still not great considering what you can get for much cheaper. If you were to, say for instance, get a 64GB one refurbished from Valve themselves, that's, you know, about £250. My new SSD cost me £90, so combining those two, you can get a very good quality Steam Deck with a terabyte of storage faster than the stock for £350. Just over a quarter, I'd say a third of the price that you would have to pay for like an ROG Ally, which is going to feel worse anyway because it's got Windows on it. As I say though, with the refurbished decks, they are quite regularly out of stock, so maybe the 256GB LCD may be another good bet for you. For £440 you could have the same sort of experience with a 1TB SSD upgrade, but you could also have with that, you know, an extra 250GB SSD that's just lying around and you can have in an enclosure. Again, for all less than £500. The 512GB OLED is a standard £480, which, you know, is still under £500, which is definitely good, but you're not getting a terabyte of storage. In order to upgrade that again, you're looking at about fucking £560. That's not great. Not to mention the fact that you're probably going to want an SD card in this as well. So that's putting you over £600 for something that you can get for about £400. It's just, this really is a no-brainer. Even though I'm coping loads and, you know, my criticisms about the OLED and its differences to the LCD, I'm thoroughly happy with my LCD. I love my Steam Deck. I would have upgraded long ago if I thought it was a worthwhile purchase over the LCD. I'd only really say that get an OLED if money is no object to you and you really care about finding the absolute best, thing you can. Otherwise, the OLED will be more than great for just casual gaming on the go. I'm not making the decision for you though. After all, if you think the positives outweigh the negatives, then go for an OLED. I've used a Switch LCD and a Switch OLED, and while they're different consoles, sure, I don't even notice the OLED after a few minutes of thinking about it. I'm usually too engrossed in whatever game I'm playing. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on this amazing device. It's not perfect, sure, but at the end of the day, nothing is. I just think that this device is absolutely amazing. It's such a good addition to the industry, and I'm excited to see what Valve innovates with the Steam Deck 2, now that they have all of this newfound competition from big names. Anyway, thank you to anyone who made it to this point in the video, and actually, you know what? I know they won't watch this, but thank you to Valve themselves. Thank you for making this elite device. I don't want to talk too much about myself here, but I suffer with really bad anxiety, and playing games is a really good and efficient way of escaping that for me. And so being able to have this on the go means that I can have the sort of calmness I would have in my room out and about almost anywhere. It's so much, my anxiety is so much more subdued on this than it would be with just having COD Mobile or Mario Kart 8. I can play whatever I want on this. I can play my favourite games of all time on this, out and about. That really helps people like me with my anxiety. It might be the same for you, it might not be the same for you, but that's what I take away from this device. It has single-handedly revolutionised the way I play games portably. It's so good, and I recommend you buying one if you have the funds. Anyway, I know I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but again, thank you if you made it to this point in the video. Let me know down in the comments below if you have a Steam Deck and enjoy it, or if you really want to get one and what game you're excited to try on it. Thanks again, and if you enjoyed this, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It helps me more than you could ever know. But yeah, that's it, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye, guys.